There was something different about the way your soulmate spoke about you last night. It was not casual. It was not the kind of conversation someone has when they are simply mentioning another person in passing. Something inside them had reached a point where keeping everything hidden felt heavier than finally saying it out loud, and when they finally opened their heart to their mother, they probably did not realize how deeply that conversation would affect them. They had been carrying your name in their thoughts for longer than they wanted to admit. Maybe they tried to begin the conversation casually. Maybe they talked about ordinary things first, pretending everything was normal. They may have sat quietly for a moment, searching for the right words, because how do you explain someone who has somehow become important to you without fully understanding how it happened? How do you tell your own mother that one person has started appearing in your thoughts at unexpected moments? How do you explain that a simple memory can suddenly change your entire mood? How do you explain why you keep wondering whether that person is thinking about you too, and perhaps that is exactly why the conversation became so emotional? Your soulmate may have started with only a few words about you, thinking they could control the conversation. But once your name entered the room, something changed. The feelings they had been trying to organize suddenly became impossible to organize. Their mother listened. She watched their face. She noticed the hesitation. She noticed the way they suddenly became quieter. And then she understood that this was not just another story. There was emotion behind it. There was uncertainty behind it. There was something unfinished behind it. Your soulmate may have tried to minimize what they were feeling. They may have said that they were confused. They may have insisted that they did not know what would happen next. They may have tried to convince themselves that they were simply thinking too much, but a mother who knows her child well can sometimes recognize what is being left unsaid. She may have looked at them and asked a question they were not prepared to answer. What is it about this person? And suddenly, silence. Because that question touched the exact place your soulmate had been avoiding. What was it about you? Why you? Why had your presence remained in their mind? Why had they remembered certain moments long after they were supposed to forget them? Why did the thought of losing the possibility of something with you bother them more than they wanted anyone to know? They may not have had an easy answer. Maybe they looked down. Maybe they laughed nervously. Maybe they changed the subject. But their mother did not let the subject disappear. She wanted to understand, and eventually, your soulmate began talking. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. They may have admitted that there was something about you they could not easily explain. Maybe it was your presence. Maybe it was the way you made them feel understood. Maybe it was the way certain conversations stayed with them. Maybe it was simply the feeling they experienced whenever your name appeared in their thoughts. Whatever the reason, something had changed. And their mother noticed. Then came the moment that made the entire conversation feel different. She suddenly raised her voice and said something that your soulmate was not expecting. You are. And then she paused. Perhaps she looked directly at them, almost as though she had discovered something they had been hiding even from themselves. You are falling for this person. Those words may have landed harder than expected, because sometimes another person can say what you have been afraid to say to yourself. Your soulmate may have immediately denied it. No, It's not like that, but perhaps their mother simply stared at them. And that stare said everything, because denial does not always mean there are no feelings. Sometimes denial means the feelings are stronger than someone is ready to admit. Your soulmate may have tried to explain every reason why they should not feel this way. They may have mentioned timing, distance, circumstances, past experiences, fear, uncertainty, things that happened before you entered their life, but beneath every explanation was the same quiet truth: they cared, and that was the part they could no longer hide. Their mother may have asked whether you knew, and that question probably created another silence. Because perhaps you do not know the full extent of what has been happening inside their world. Maybe you have only seen pieces, a message, a pause, a strange coincidence, a conversation that ended too soon, a moment when they seemed close and then suddenly distant, a change in their behavior that you could not understand. But behind those visible moments, there may have been an internal struggle you never witnessed. They were trying to understand what you meant to them, and last night, they finally allowed themselves to speak about it. Their mother may have asked what they wanted. That question may have been even harder, because wanting someone and knowing what to do about those feelings are two completely different things. Your soulmate may want closeness but fear vulnerability. They may want to reach out but worry about rejection. They may want to explain everything but fear that once the truth is spoken, there will be no way to take it back, and perhaps that is why they have moved so slowly. Not because nothing matters, but because something matters too much. Sometimes people hesitate when their emotions are insignificant, but sometimes they hesitate because the consequences feel enormous. Your soulmate may have realized that if they approach you honestly, they cannot continue pretending that everything is casual. They would have to become vulnerable. They would have to acknowledge the feelings. They would have to accept that you might not respond the way they hope, and that possibility can frighten even someone who appears confident. Their mother may have recognized that fear. Perhaps she told them something simple: if you care about someone, don't let fear make the decision for you. Your soulmate may have gone quiet again, because that sentence may have touched something deep. How many times had fear already made decisions for them? How many times had they waited when they wanted to speak? How many times had they acted indifferent when they actually cared? How many opportunities had passed because they were waiting for the perfect moment? And then they may have thought about you, not the idea of you, not some imagined version. You, the real person, the person with your own emotions, your own choices, your own life. And perhaps they realized something important. If they truly wanted something meaningful with you, they could not build it through silence forever. They would eventually have to communicate. They would eventually have to be honest. They would eventually have to let you decide what you wanted too. That realization may have changed something inside them, because love, when it is healthy, is not about controlling another person's choices. It is about having the courage to express what is true while respecting what the other person chooses. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to understand that. Their mother may have said more. Maybe she told them not to chase an illusion. Maybe she told them to speak honestly and listen carefully. Maybe she reminded them that real connection cannot be built entirely inside someone's imagination. That may have been the most important part of the conversation, because your soulmate has spent enough time thinking. Now they may need to communicate, not dramatically, not perfectly, simply honestly. Maybe they will begin with a small message. Maybe they will ask how you are. Maybe they will mention something that reminds them of you. Maybe they will finally address a conversation that has remained unfinished. You may not know when. You may not know exactly how, but if they choose to move toward you, it should come through real-world actions, clear communication, and mutual respect, not mysterious signs alone, and perhaps that is the deeper meaning hidden inside everything that happened last night. Something inside them shifted, not because destiny forced them, not because some invisible power controls their choices, but because they finally allowed themselves to acknowledge something they had been avoiding. They care about you, and sometimes admitting that to another person makes it impossible to keep lying to yourself. Their mother may have seen that. She may have understood before your soulmate did. Perhaps she asked one final question. If this person walked away tomorrow, would you regret never telling them how you felt? That question may have stayed with them, because regret can be powerful. Not regret over something that never belonged to you, but regret over opportunities you never had the courage to explore honestly. Maybe your soulmate imagined you moving forward. Maybe they imagined you meeting someone else. Maybe they imagined a future in which they never said anything, and perhaps that thought made them uncomfortable, not because they believe they own your future. They do not. But because they finally understood that time does not wait for anyone. People change, circumstances change, lives move forward. And sometimes the opportunity to speak honestly disappears simply because someone waited too long. That may be why their mother's words affected them so deeply. She may have told them, if you want an answer, stop guessing and have the conversation. Simple, direct, powerful. And perhaps your soulmate knew she was right. Maybe they have spent too much time trying to decode your behavior. Maybe they have wondered whether you care. Maybe they have searched for clues in small moments. But no amount of guessing can replace communication. If they want to know how you feel, they have to give you the freedom to tell them, and if you want to know how they feel, they need to give you the truth. That is where something real can begin. Not through fantasy, not through fear, not through pressure, through honesty. And perhaps last night was the first time your soulmate truly understood that. They may have gone to bed thinking about the conversation. Maybe they replayed their mother's words. Maybe they wondered whether they had revealed too much. Maybe they wondered whether they were finally ready to stop hiding. And somewhere in those quiet hours, they may have realized that your name had become connected to a question they could no longer ignore. What am I going to do about this? That question is important, because feelings alone do not create a relationship. Actions matter. Consistency matters. Respect matters. Communication matters. And if your soulmate truly wants to build something with you, those things will eventually become visible. You should not have to spend forever guessing. You should not have to decode every silence. You should not have to chase someone who refuses to meet you halfway. The right kind of connection should leave room for both people to speak, and maybe that is what their mother was trying to teach them. She was not simply shouting because she was shocked. Perhaps she was reacting because she could see her child standing at the edge of an important decision. She may have realized that your soulmate was no longer talking about you as a passing interest. They were talking about you as someone who had affected them. Someone whose presence had changed something. Someone whose absence was noticeable. Someone they could not simply dismiss. And perhaps, after everything was said, their mother gave them the kind of advice that stays in the mind for years. Don't promise what you cannot give. But don't hide what you truly feel either. Your soulmate may have carried those words with them, and maybe you are wondering what happens next. That is where the story becomes uncertain, because nobody can know another person's future choices with certainty. Your soulmate has free will. You have free will. The future is not a script already written in perfect detail. But one thing can change the direction of any connection: truth. When people stop pretending, possibilities become clearer. Maybe your soulmate will reach out. Maybe they will finally explain themselves. Maybe they will ask for another chance. Maybe they will simply admit what they have been feeling. Or maybe they will realize they need to grow before they can offer anything meaningful. Whatever happens, you deserve clarity. You deserve honesty. You deserve someone who communicates instead of keeping you trapped inside endless uncertainty. And perhaps that is why this message feels different. It is not really about a dramatic sentence shouted by a mother. It is about the moment when hidden emotions become impossible to ignore. It is about someone realizing that pretending not to care does not make the feelings disappear. It is about courage, and maybe your soulmate is finally learning what courage actually means. Courage is not sending 100 messages. Courage is not making grand promises. Courage is not demanding an answer. Courage is simply being honest while allowing another person the freedom to choose. Maybe that is what they will do next. Maybe they will approach you differently, more calmly, more honestly, without games, without pretending. And if they do, pay attention not just to their words but to their consistency. Anyone can say beautiful things in an emotional moment. What matters is what they repeatedly choose afterward. Perhaps your soulmate's mother understands that better than anyone. She may have seen people make promises before. She may know that feelings can be intense one day and confusing the next. So perhaps she did not tell your soulmate to chase you. Perhaps she told them to become honest enough to know what they truly want. That distinction matters. Because you are not someone's prize. You are not someone's destiny to possess. You are a person with your own heart, and any meaningful connection must honor that. Maybe this is why the conversation happened now. Not because the universe has guaranteed a particular outcome, but because your soulmate reached a point where self-honesty became necessary. Something had been building, a realization, a memory, a conversation, a feeling, maybe several things at once, and last night, it finally spilled into words. Your soulmate may have said your name more than once. Perhaps they described something you did that stayed in their mind. Maybe they remembered your smile. Maybe they remembered your kindness. Maybe they remembered a conversation that seemed ordinary at the time but became meaningful later. and perhaps their mother noticed the details, because people rarely remember meaningless things with that much emotion. She may have realized that your soulmate was not simply talking about you, they were remembering you. And remembering can reveal what the heart has been holding. Perhaps your soulmate finally admitted something else. They miss you. Maybe they did not say it immediately, maybe they resisted the words, but eventually, perhaps the truth emerged. I miss them, and that sentence may have changed the room. Because missing someone means acknowledging their absence. It means their presence mattered. It means something about them became part of your emotional world. Their mother may have looked at them and realized just how deep the situation had become. Maybe she asked whether they had told you. And again, silence. That silence may have said everything. No, they had not. Maybe because they were scared. Maybe because they did not know how. Maybe because they thought you would not understand. Maybe because they believed there would always be another opportunity. But last night may have challenged that assumption. There may not always be another opportunity, and perhaps your soulmate finally understood that. So now, somewhere inside their mind, a decision may be forming. Not necessarily a dramatic decision, a simple one, to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to stop allowing fear to speak louder than honesty, and if they choose to contact you, perhaps the conversation will begin quietly. No grand announcement, no dramatic confession, just two people finally speaking honestly. Maybe that is all that was ever needed. Maybe what looked complicated was actually waiting for one sincere conversation, and maybe you have been waiting too, not necessarily for a particular person, but for clarity, for something real, for someone who does not make you question your worth, for someone who can say what they mean and mean what they say. If your soulmate comes toward you with that kind of honesty, you can listen, but remember that you are allowed to choose too. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to decide whether their actions match their words. You are allowed to protect your peace. And perhaps that is the most beautiful part of this entire message. You do not have to force the future. You do not have to chase an outcome. You do not have to spend every night trying to figure out what someone else is thinking. Let people reveal themselves through their choices. Let truth become visible. Let consistency speak. And if this person truly wants a place in your life, they can show you through respectful, honest action. Maybe last night was the beginning of that realization for them. Maybe their mother's unexpected reaction forced them to look at themselves differently. Maybe they walked away from that conversation realizing that the person they had been trying to forget was actually someone they still cared about. Maybe they finally understood why your name kept returning to their thoughts. Maybe they realized they were not confused about you, they were afraid of what admitting their feelings would require. And there is a difference. Fear can make certainty look like confusion. Fear can make someone run from what they actually want. Fear can convince someone that silence is safer. But safety and happiness are not always the same thing. Sometimes the safest choice is also the loneliest, and perhaps your soulmate is beginning to understand that. Maybe they looked at their mother one final time and asked, "What should I do?" And perhaps she did not give them the answer they wanted. Maybe she simply said, "Do what is honest." those 3 words may have stayed with them: do what is honest, not what is dramatic. Not what is convenient, not what protects the ego. What is honest? And now the next chapter belongs to real life. If they reach out, let the conversation happen naturally. If they apologize, listen to the substance of the apology. If they express feelings, notice whether they are prepared to respect yours. If they ask for another opportunity, decide based on what is healthy and meaningful for you. And if nothing happens immediately, do not assume that your life has to pause. Your life continues, your growth continues, your dreams continue, your future continues. A meaningful connection should add to your life, not consume it. Perhaps that is the hidden lesson inside everything that happened last night. Your soulmate may be realizing that. Loving someone is not about keeping them trapped inside your thoughts. It is about eventually having the courage to meet them in reality. Maybe that meeting is coming. Maybe a conversation is approaching. Maybe an explanation. Maybe an apology. Maybe a simple message that begins with words neither of you expected to receive. But whatever happens, let it be grounded in reality. Let it be mutual. Let it be respectful. Let it be something both people consciously choose. Because